And we are so blessed to be a part of this uh, God's movement at Eden Village of Tulsa. And I want to take about 2 or 3 minutes to read. Uh, I was very, very passionate about learning the stories of each of these neighbors that has been given or sponsored by churches and individuals and corporations and such like that to have a dignified, safe home, that they have an address, they have a dignified home, and they have other neighbors. And it's just fantastic what Brad, Becky, the vision that they had for that 63 neighbor village. It's just, I can't put into words, but I would like to take about 3 minutes to read, because this young lady was one of the first of the 9 that came into the village, and her name is Jennifer. All right. I'm not going to read all of it, but she writes her own story, and that's the beautiful part of the whole thing. All right. So January 1st, moved into Eden Village, beautiful home 101, sponsored by the Intercom and Brad and Brenda Thomas. Since I moved in, reality has hit hard in a particular aspect of my life. I was faced with the dilemma that I thought was no longer an issue in my life. So I had to choose to make, and I'm glad that I made the right one. The Friday before I left for rehab, Brad Johnson, founder of Eden Village, came and sat on my porch with me and had a conversation with me and told me he had never experienced what I was going through, but for me to know that I had my Eden Village family loving, praying, supporting me, and then they would be there beside me. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. I felt truly loved, and I have never experienced what true Christian love really felt like before that day. That day, he told me that there was a reason why I was in House 101. There was a reason why I was chosen. There is a reason, and I am the reason. The reason is for me to have a real chance at a better life, a life of hope and faith to overcome and conquer what lies ahead, and to see my life in a different light. I am so humbly honored being at Eden Village, and my life will never be the same. Her name is Jennifer. She is sponsored in 101, not one of our sponsored homes and such, but we have now 4 teams of 2 to 4 people and stuff like that. It's home teams that are making a difference in their life. But there's 36 now out at Eden Village in dignified, safe homes, and now we're getting our barn together. We just have waiting for the permit for the farm to come through from the city of Tulsa, and it's happening. It is just a God's miracle, is all I can say. It's just extra special. So thank you for letting me share. Okay, so I'm going to give this over to Ken Klein, and we're going to get the speaker started.
So it's pretty interesting that we would hear, as we begin a talk with Bill Kellough, about a way that lives get changed. And one way is through Eden Village, and we're going to hear more about another way. And thank you, Jan. And we're going to hear a little bit from Bill, How many of you know Bill? Wow. How many, keep your arms up. Keep your arms right, just a second. Everybody. So how many know him because he was looking down at you from the bench? Eddie Crockett for sure. And Wayne Kendrick was telling me just a few minutes ago that he walked into a crowded room and somebody yelled from across the room, "Hey Wayne, when'd you get out of jail?" So Bill, you'll never outlive your days on the bench, and thank God for that. So rather than talk about Bill, I'd rather have Bill talk about himself, and in terms of his life, his time on the bench, and then what led him to start to be a part of First Step, kind of like Keenan was one of the three founders of Iron Gate. So Bill.
Okay, I'm mic'd up. I think you can hear me. I can certainly hear myself. So thanks a lot, Ken. And I will tell you just a little bit about my background, which is not important today. What's important is the program and the mission that I'll be discussing with you. But I'm a lifelong Tulsan. I did get higher education at a school in Austin, Texas, so let's keep that to ourselves. I came back in 1975 with my wife, and we raised three daughters, and I was in private practice at a firm in downtown Tulsa for 30 years. And then fortuitously, or maybe through some revelation, I'm not sure, a position opened on the district court bench in Tulsa, and I ran for the office of district judge. And the presiding judge at the time was Kent Frizzell. Many of you know who he is. And he said, "Well, Bill, I'm glad you're here. And by the way, the only position we have available for you right now is a criminal docket, felony criminal cases." And I said, "Well, I have to admit, I never tried, even came close to a criminal case in 30 years. He said, "Well, you'll learn." And I did sort of a crash course from the election in November to January, getting sworn in 2007. And it was a daunting experience. I remember the first day I went out as a judge on the bench, there was a crowd in the courtroom that's twice this crowd. Some people in orange over here. Lots of people that I had never seen the lawyers before. I didn't know anything about it. And literally most everybody in the courtroom knew more about criminal law than I did. But like many things in life, you bluff your way through. So I got through the first day or two, and then decided this is very impactful. This is challenging. This is important work, and I'm just going to stick with it. So I had several chances to change because I became the presiding judge myself and could have reappointed myself, but I stuck with the criminal docket, and I'm glad I did because it was a life-changing experience. While I was on the criminal docket, I had the pleasure of having an assistant public defender who was in my courtroom essentially every day for those 8 years, named David Phillips. And his boss at the end of that term became a guy named Rob Nye. And those two other attorneys and I got together and formed this organization, First Step Male Diversion Program. But I'll get all to that in a minute. That's the sort of the what and the how and the why, but there's also the who. And as Mike was describing a case study for that you're supporting, I have two experiences or two examples that I know both of these young men. And the first one, he came into our program when he was 24, which is just on a little bit the older side of the men that we take in. He was addicted to methamphetamine seriously, course, there's no other way to be addicted to methamphetamine. He had been separated from his young infant son. The boy's mother was long gone. He was surly and suspicious and difficult. But over time, with the programming that I'll be talking about, he changed dramatically. He ended up getting his son back from Department of Human Services. He got married, which is, we always applaud that when we hear about it. He got steady employment in the manufacturing business here in Tulsa. And then in 2023, after he had graduated, the board of directors decided we needed a member of First Step on our board to give a perspective, and he is now a board member, and a very active and very creative board member. The other example, a young man who came to us when he was 18 after a long string of juvenile offenses, and that's very common. Our age range is 18 to 30, with an emphasis on 18 to 25, essentially, because that's the most formative and important time to intervene in the life of a young offender or a young man. And this gentleman had a long string of juvenile offenses, drug-related. 90% of the men that come into our program are either there because of drug charges or a drug addiction or some connection with addiction in their family. He was addicted to methamphetamine and fentanyl, and we have started seeing more of that, and it's alarming. Anyway, he became fully engaged in all of our services, and he went to welding school, got a job as a welder, and now he, as a graduate, fills in as a house manager. So he's giving back to the organization. Those are just two small slices of the who that we like to talk about and applaud. But what do we do? Well, the concept we're working on is called, it's a word that you probably haven't used very often, but you've used a form of it. We call it habilitation, not rehabilitation, because that would imply that there was something to rehabilitate from. And to be perfectly honest, these young men are coming from a position of complete lack of skills in every capacity to be a success in life. So our goal is to habilitate them and divert them from prison. And we take the hard cases. There are a lot of programs, many excellent ones, and counseling programs and interventions for first-time offenders. And as my experience on the bench, a first offender, even back in the old days when things were a little tougher, rarely got a prison sentence. It was always a probation the first time around. Now, the second, third time, that may be a little different, but those are the folks that I'm not putting down any effort to deal with their problems. They need to be dealt with, but we decided, Rob and David Phillips and I, that it was the hard cases, the ones who were, the term in the DA's office is prison bound. It sounds like homeward bound, but it's not. Prison bound means most of the time that the individual has 2 or more prior felony convictions, which makes that person ineligible for probation by state law. But that state law can be waived by the district attorney. So with the approval of the DA, in this case, Steve Kunzweiler now is the district attorney and his team, anybody who has 2 or more prior felony convictions can have those convictions waived so that they can go into a program like ours. But that's why they're prison bound, because absent First Step and the female version of our program called Women in Recovery, then they're going to go to prison 5, 10, 15 years. When we had one individual who was looking at a life sentence because of his prior trafficking in methamphetamine, which is essentially just having a large amount in your possession. So they're prison bound, and they're also, and this is extremely important, we drew a line at violent versus nonviolent. We have turned away a number of young men ever since the beginning who have either a current charge, such as robbery or even burglary, or a firearm involved in their whatever crime they committed, and they're violent criminals. And that's a terrible tag to put on somebody, but it also reflects the difficulty that you have in getting the judges and the district attorney to buy in to a more relaxed approach to their sentence, as it, in my view, should be. So we don't take gang members. Typically, they've got a past that's violent, and if it's a juvenile past that's violent, so that gives us a population that we can work with, and we're in the business of trying to be successful. Because it's the resources that we employ and the manpower is significant, and we don't want to throw it away, and we don't want to jeopardize public safety. The thing to know about First Step and other diversion programs, there are none, by the way, in Oklahoma like ours, but there are in some other jurisdictions. The thing to understand about what we do is we're a really rather conservative, conservative organization, because we're not here to change the law dramatically. We sometimes don't like what we see, but our goal is to change the lives of the young men who are having to adapt to society and the laws that we have created. And so what we provide is maybe first and foremost mental health and substance abuse counseling and intervention. Now, those are two very important concepts. Counseling, can you have water? Yep. Counseling is just like it sounds. It's a group therapy or individual therapy in a setting of kind of like this, only a small number of people, of course, just dealing with trauma, dealing with all of the root causes of addiction. Intervention is much more invasive, and it often involves people at high risk. Even their lives are at stake. So we'll take in a young man who needs to go immediately to what we call detox. And 12 and 12 used to be a place that we would send folks. There's other options. There are other places in and around northeastern Oklahoma. Yeah, thank you. I get dry. Yeah, I appreciate it. I'll try not to spill that. Yeah, let me put it right here. Excuse me. And so we have to address their addiction issue first and foremost. Then we provide housing. For the first 90 days of the program, they're in mandatory house arrest at housing that we provide. And that's what I'll get to at the end. I'd like to talk to you about our housing needs and our housing opportunities. But we have currently 3 houses, and they're not apartments. They're in neighborhoods. The most recent one, which I'll get to later in more detail, is out on West 7th Street off of the Sand Springs, the Highway 51 to Stillwater. And it's 2 acres of land that we are going to eventually create a campus, we hope. And right now it has a house that can house 8 men. The city of Tulsa has a limit on the number of non-affiliated people that can live in a house. You probably didn't know this, but if you had like 7 friends and you wanted to move in together, you could do that, but you couldn't have 8 friends, because then that would be too many. But it's essentially we take advantage of that. 8 men to a house. That's 1 house manager and 7 residents. However, you can become a group home, which requires planning commission authority and a variance, actually a special exception to the zoning code, and you can house up to 14. And the house out in West Tulsa is going to go to that environment of housing 14. It has 7 bedrooms, and so it's going to be a nice accommodation for 2 men to a room. So housing is critically important. In fact, housing is part of the therapy, to be honest. The ability to live with these peers in the same environment, they become kind of like a fraternity. They work together, they play together, they cook, they clean the house. There's a self-discipline involved in it. And another model that has been used is an apartment where you would have 4 men to a unit, but they're all isolated. So there's no commonality really, except maybe occasionally getting together in a common room or a swimming pool or something. We want them to actually learn to live together, and for many of them, it's the first living home environment they've ever experienced. And then, we provide job training, very robust from day one. They're given opportunities, and I won't go into all the details, but there are a number of organizations. One of them is called CEO, which is a organization funded by the Kaiser Foundation, and it has 2 very important elements. One is the young men are given job training in various capacities and a paycheck. So from day one, they get a paycheck, and they're a W-2 employee for the first time in their lives. And that in and of itself becomes a life-changing experience. I think we're raising a whole lot of young capitalists because we find that their enthusiasm for the program and for success is, let's say, related to that paycheck and the money that they earn themselves that they aren't taking from somebody else. And it's very interesting to see the dynamics. Then we have job placement, because you don't want to train somebody and then have them frustrated with nothing to do. And the job placement has been very robust. We have this gentleman who's a welder, a manufacturing plant here. There's a truck driving school in Memphis that has taken to us. We have these guys get jobs in what we would call living wage or better positions. It used to be when we first started out, it was a little more difficult, but now there's I don't know if the economics have changed, and there's a need for more blue collar workers, and there's a little bit of a relaxation of this, justice involved kind of thing. And so we're seeing organizations that are used to say no, don't even bring them over here, to saying, yeah, we'll look at them. And that gives great opportunities for us. And then, of course, other ancillary matters that are important to the individuals on a case-by-case basis. Anger management, trauma, counseling, and then, of course, education. They're required to have a GED to graduate from the program. And 1 or 2 have actually finished high school while in First Step, but that becomes kind of difficult. So we just make sure they have a complete GED opportunity. We have yet to have a university graduate come into our program, and probably never will. That's fine, because we don't expect, and we don't expect them to go on to college or university. Some of them have. I know one young man was a computer whiz, and you know how that can just take you all the way to the top without a whole lot of effort. And he's at OSU right now, doing well. And then there's another aspect of what we do that I think makes us somewhat unique. Our executive director, as I said, is David Phillips, and David is an attorney, and I forgot to set my timer. I'll just kind of keep an eye on the clock. And so what he does is he accompanies these guys to court because they have to report to the judge assigned their case on a monthly basis. He advocates for them, but he also acknowledges the need for discipline from time to time. And then he and his staff do things for these guys that really, my experience on the bench was this is an kind of a under the radar problem with anybody who's trying to pull themselves out of the dilemma they're in. And it's things like fines and costs, and it's things like being involved in cases in other jurisdictions. We might have a young man who's got a felony charge in Tulsa County, but he may have 3 misdemeanors in Rogers County. And then the fines and costs are usually enormous. And we find that judges are willing, with an advocate and with a program backing us up, to waive the fines and costs. It can be thousands of dollars. And so this is a piece of the problem that is unanswered by the probation system. If you're put on probation, which means you're not incarcerated, you check in periodically with a probation officer who hands you a brochure and says, here's some ideas on where to get a job, and we'll see you next month. And you can't do that. You've got to take more of a hands-on approach, and you babysit them to some extent. I have to use that term because they don't know what to do or where to go. Getting their driver's license renewed. It's usually been suspended. Getting a car tag if they have a car, which they don't, by the way, during the first 90 days. They're not allowed to have their own car. So there's this piece of this program that is more involved with essentially lawyering for them. And that is a key element to their success, I think. So that's the concept. The background is that in 2016, Rob Nye and David Phillips and I incorporated First Step, and we had our first young man in the program in 2017. We modeled it after Women in Recovery, which is the Family and Children's Services program funded by the Kaiser Foundation, and it was strictly and limited to women. And it had been very successful. I had a number of those ladies in my courtroom over those 8 years, and they were, it was impressive how successful they were. We spent a good period of the first year before we got our first participant, vetting it with the district attorney's office. That was critical. There was no point in going through the effort of putting this thing together without the buy-in from the DA. And luckily, all 3 of us had great relationships with the district attorney's office, and we utilized them to the fullest. They're pleased with us now. Steve Kunzweiler came to the opening of our latest house and said this is the path forward for so many. They're always looking for an opportunity to not have to use that 2 strikes or 3 strikes and you're out rule, and to give some young man a second chance. Then we needed money, of course. So fortunately, I had a nice long relationship with Ruth Kaiser Nelson, who unfortunately passed away in 2023. And so I took my 2 buddies to see Ruth, and this was classic with her. We talked for a half an hour, just like I'm doing right now, just throwing all this out at her. She didn't say a word, didn't bat an eye, never changed expression. And when I was finished, she said, "How much do you need?" And music to our ears. And we had not, stupidly, we hadn't figured that out. So on the fly, I said $100,000. She said, okay. So as we walked out, we looked at each other like, how much did we leave on the table? I don't know. We certainly must have. But she was in from 17, 18, 19, 20 through 22, our angel, basically, with six-figure contributions. And it was quite remarkable. And we kept her abreast, and we brought in some of our guys to meet her, and she was always impressed. But and then the other little contribution, well, smaller but still very, I think, rewarding, was a United Way, what's called a social innovation grant, which we received $75,000. So that was our seed money, and we went forward from there and hired case managers, which are the backbone of any organization like this, and began with the programming. We don't have on staff, except for one exception. We don't have the providers of services. We find them, and we find them as cheaply as possible, or sometimes no charge whatsoever. And so we started off with a counseling and therapy service, and we've moved to another one since then. We looked for like the CEO opportunity with the Kaiser Foundation, and we find ways of having experts come to us and help us, and so our administrative costs are very low. Most of the costs go to actual support of the young men through those 2 years, and support can be intensive at first, and then not so much after they get a good job and they're on their own out of our housing. They're more or less self-sufficient. But admittedly, a little catastrophe of this or that comes up, and we kind of feel the need to provide, with accountability, the funding that may be necessary to pull them out of the ditch if they're in one. And Medicaid is available for medical care, dental care. We have that provided for us, and so we sort of patch together a life for these guys. It goes on for at least a year and a half, mostly 2 years. During that time, they're accountable to the court. They're going down every month, and we're going with them to present themselves to the judge handling the case. And then, if successful, then at the end of that time period, a lot of things happen that are really good. One is the case itself that got them in front of that judge is dismissed, and the record on that case is expunged. So they end up with nothing essentially on their record whatsoever. Now, they have prior record problems. Sometimes we can get them removed if it's a misdemeanor, sometimes we can't, and sometimes they're burdened the rest of their life with a felony conviction. But nonetheless, they're given as much of a fresh start as they possibly can. And then the judge will sometimes require a comeback in about a year to report one more time before completely severing all connections. We find that about half of the young men go on to maintain peer relationships with other young men in the program. They've become friends. They become big brothers, so to speak, and they respect that relationship and make good use of it. Currently, our funding sources, unfortunately, with the death of Ms. Nelson, there isn't that particular source is no longer available from her family, but we have about 10 to 12 private foundations. I have a list here of organizations you've heard of: the Burnson Foundation, Hardesty, the Stewart Family Foundation, Frank Foundation, Helmrich. The Helmrich Family Foundation just gave us the money for that house over in West Tulsa, which was very, very generous. And so every year, about January, those of us who are in the mode of soliciting for funds hit the trail and bring in what we can. And it's becoming difficult, but it's not impossible, and we remain optimistic. Lately, we've been tapping into some funding that was never available from two sources. One is the rather incredible opioid trust fund. Some of you have heard of it. Our former Attorney General Mike Hunter, before he left office, successfully sued Purdue Pharma on behalf of the state of Oklahoma and settled for a substantial amount of money ahead of everybody else. It was quite a coup, and that put Oklahoma in a really excellent position. We receive about $25 million a year from the fund. The fund is actually a huge multi-billion-dollar fund managed out of Washington, D.C., but the money that comes into Oklahoma streams through the Attorney General's office and then out to the counties and to cities, not to private entities like us directly. It's just to the entity, the governmental entities. But our opportunity is with the county, so we can actually, and we made a presentation recently to the county commissioners for treatment funding from the funds they get. So that's going to be, I think, a good thing for us. And the other aspect is even a little more esoteric, called the 781 Fund. I digress a little bit. Back in 2018, we, maybe some of you, voted in favor of converting felony possession of drugs from a felony to a misdemeanor. And you did it in companion with, or in connection with, another law that said the savings to the state, to the Department of Corrections, by this action will be set aside and identified and will be used for treatment programs for organizations like ourselves. It's called 781 money because it was a state question 781. Well, that was in 2018. Finally, last year, 6 years later, the legislature finally certified an amount of money that could be identified as savings. So that's now plowing itself back into the system, and we're going after some of that funding too through the county, Tulsa County. But the service we provide is broader than Tulsa County. We are now servicing the United States District Court for the Northern District of Oklahoma and the Eastern District of Oklahoma. So we have federal cases. These are federal young men who are charged with street crimes in the federal system. And then we also have recently entered into a memorandum of understanding with the Cherokee tribe, and we're moving on the Creeks next, and I think Muskogees. And so we're going to be able to deal with their individuals who, and I see a prominent Cherokee sitting back there nodding his head. And I think ultimately we're going to have a lot of tribal representation. Now, the little bit of a wrinkle there, tribal defendants don't go to the state penitentiary, and they don't face the same number of years that that our guys are exposed to by the state of Oklahoma. But they are still dealing with, they still have a prison sentence they're looking at, and they still have to be dealt with. They're citizens of our community, and fortunately the tribes are willing to actually help with a stipend on their behalf. So that's another promising source for us. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about the house that I mentioned, and leaves time for questions and answers. And I'm going to give you, Ken, this little packet that more adequately describes the house project, and I want you to keep that and look it over as a contractor. I think it's got information that you could find relevant. Anyway, it's out at, pardon me? You might consider it that if you'd like, yeah. Anyway, we'll be talking. It's at 7303 West 7th Street, 2 acres, and like I said, there's a residential living facility. It used to be a church retreat of some sort, but it's got 7 bedrooms, a nice big wide open atrium kind of environment for the guys to hang out in, and it has another building for their sort of recreation. It has a building we can convert to an office, so we could have this as basically a campus. A campus would be a really good idea, to bring all the programming into one place and the administration in one place. We have a budget, aggressive budget of $1 million, but $230,000 is really connected with the house itself to get it ADA compliant, and just a little bit of why we're doing that. It's not that we have individuals who have disabilities. It's because to get certified by the State Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services, which is another funding source, we have to have a facility that's ADA compliant. So it's kind of all ties together, and that's going to cost us some money. But we're kind of excited about this place, and the guys even in March put in a vegetable garden, and they have an incredible crop of cucumbers and tomatoes, and some of our board members have actually gone out there and helped them. So I've kind of talked through all this. I'd say the future of our organization is good, but it's challenging, and we are at a crossroads to some extent of how we can grow. We have about 18 men currently. We need, in my view, we need to operate with about 25 to 30 at any given time, and just kind of keep rolling them through. 25 to 30. That will be a good, solid number. If you get too much beyond that, you're not as effective, and if you're too low in your numbers, you're kind of a boutique, and you're not doing anything that's that significant. So that's our goal, and we've met it ever since we started, and I think we're going to continue to grow. So with that, I'd like to open it up for questions.
Questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Are there families involved with any of this? I mean, some of them may have been just kicked out or whatever, but
Yeah,
any families?
that's a great question. The families of these young men are both their salvation and their downfall, depending on the family. If it's a family that is supportive, and this is why we're small enough to really know, what the situation is. If this family is supportive, if there's a spouse or a girlfriend or a mother or father that we know we can kind of rely on, then yes, they're brought into the process. But most of the time, I'm afraid to say it's not quite that rosy of a picture. And we have to actually remove these guys from their peer relationships, including some of their families. Yes,
Yeah.
Mike?
Bill, on that short bio and such like that we put together, you said are prisoners to cost.
Yes.
In our Department of Correction. I wonder if you might share
Yeah.
what that would be.
Right. Well, I'm not a cost accountant, but I've kind of messed with this for the last few years because funders are wanting to know, what are we saving the state of Oklahoma? And it kind of works out something like this. Our guys cost us anywhere from $18,000 to $25,000 per 2-year term. In other words, the program itself, if you take them from beginning to end, that's the amount of money you're going to spend on them in one way or another, directly or indirectly. There's that side of it. And then on the Department of Corrections side, if they go to prison, as they are going to go if you don't intervene, then the calculation is based on where they go. There's 23 prisons in the state of Oklahoma. And they're all the way from the Maximum, the McAllister, to much more medium security, one in Veneta, and all over the state. And these these costs are published in their website. You can actually see on a per prisoner basis what the state has to pay to incarcerate somebody. And it's generally 23 to 30,000 a year. So if you got a guy that's going to get 5 years or 7 years or 10 years, multiply that number by what the DOC charge is, and you're up to $500,000 easily compared to what we can cap it at. So that's why I can make a convincing argument that it saves taxpayer money. Yes.
Hang on, David. Let me limp over here.
This is just fascinating. Really, it is. I can imagine that day to day, hundreds of little tactical issues can come up that you didn't get a chance to talk about,
Yeah.
and you couldn't begin to.
Yeah.
But I'll just take one of them. You said for 90 days they cannot have a vehicle.
Right.
Now, what if their direction is going to allow them to go to truck driving school? How do they get there? How do they do?
We have 2 vans, and we have 2 volunteer drivers, and we also get them used to the bus system. So the vans are active all day for these guys. They're taking them to work, they're taking them to job interviews, and they're taking them to appointments that we don't have at our site. And that it would be a lot more convenient if we allowed them to have cars, but they're under house arrest. They have an ankle monitor, and the judges are going to insist on that. So we're pretty strict about it. But once that 90 days is over, then they can get a car, and they're mobile, and they can go out on their own. Yeah. Yes, Connie.
Connie, hang on.
Yeah.
So, Bill, thanks for telling us the story.
Thank you.
I'm always concerned. We had the She Brews person come and speak to us about the women that she's helping.
Yeah.
And I have a tough time calculating all the court costs and fees.
Yeah.
I mean, people can get their life turned around and have thousands of dollars. And isn't the court funded by all of us, the taxpayers? How can you justify double charging somebody because they made a mistake?
Yeah.
Not you personally, but the court system.
Yeah, no. When I was on the bench for those 8 years, the Office of the Administration of the Courts out of Oklahoma City, and their executive director would come to Tulsa every year and give all the judges a pep talk on how to assess and collect fines and costs. It always grated with me. I knew it had to happen, but I was never an enthusiastic supporter. And nobody is, even the district attorney's office. But about 85% of the court system is funded by fines and costs, not your taxpayer dollars. It's just the way it's always been, and there's not much chance to see a change. But recently, I could come back and talk about this subject because some of you know or have heard of Bert Holmes, who's the great benefactor of so many different things around the community. Bert got into I don't know where he got the idea, but he became obsessed with fines and costs in the court system, and several of us worked with him to get a law passed. And there is now a much more forgiving set of rules, but there's still the basic expenses, and they come from fines, which are like, a portion of your criminal charge. It's like, a $500 fine for shoplifting, and it's in the statute. There's every crime has a little amount of money that's associated with it. Then there's the costs, and costs are they're the hidden part of it, and they're anywhere from $1.50 for the computer fund or the sheriff's and peace officers' retirement fund. I mean, there's about 70 different line items of cost. Some of them are nickels and dimes, but they add up. And so these young men, they get their fines assessed, and then they get their costs assessed, and you don't walk out of a felony with anything less than about $2,000, and it usually goes up from there. So that's where this new law has given us some teeth to say to the judges to forgive it or to put it on a slow pay, reduced pay, all kinds of things that can be done now that we didn't have the tools before.
Royce?
Thank you, Bill. Would you speak to the mental health care that they get,
Yeah.
pluses and minuses? Thank you.
Good point. I have to admit that we don't, if a young man comes to us and is screened for admittance, if he has a serious mental health condition, and we have the expertise on hand to find that out, schizophrenia or severe, maybe even severe depression, we often have to turn them down because in the process of going through 2 years of our program, there has to be a sort of a base level emotional and intellectual ability to accept what we're giving them and to deal with what the programs are wanting them to do. But having said that, I'll say that the vast majority of the young men have something that I think all of us would identify as a mental health issue. And it could be depression on a less intense level, anxiety, trauma, PTSD, things that are allowing them to deal with their problems and come through the program successfully, but are not going to be a complete barrier to their treatment. So unfortunately, I wish we could do a little bit more for some of these guys that are, on the outer edge of mental health breakdown. But we don't, and what happens to them, well, that's another story, and it's not a particularly good one either, because our mental health intervention anymore through the criminal justice system is abysmal, quite frankly. I don't think I really answered your question, but I did. Candidly, we don't address significant mental health issues and cognitive ability too. I think you'd have to say we've had a few young men whose IQ is simply so low that we've said, we're just not going to be able to deal with you. Yes, sir. Yeah.
I don't really think that I got out of this that there is any emphasis on either religious or biblical training in this program. And I was wondering if this is a part of the program.
Yeah, actually, you're correct. It's not. We have members of our team, David Phillips in particular, who is a very active member of his church, Methodist Church, and he brings some of these guys to church with him. But it's on a voluntary basis, and there's nothing imposed upon anybody. It's an element of life that I'm not at all dismissive of it, but I feel like with the problems we're addressing, it isn't the first thing we have to deal with. I think, in fact, I believe that the men that have become more acclimated to a religious life, and there have been, are later in the program after they've kind of gotten their base level needs taken care of. So we're certainly open and welcoming to religion in any capacity, but it isn't part of the program per se. Yeah.
So, Bill, can you speak to the success rate? Or to
Oh, yeah.
failure
I
rate,
should have
whichever
led
one?
with that because it's really rather impressive. The touchstone for any organization like ours or any program or, criminal justice project is recidivism. And recidivism is based on a very simple proposition. After this individual has gone through whatever you're doing for them, do they reoffend? Not are they criminally convicted of anything, but do they reoffend in the criminal justice system, arrested? and our recidivism rate is less than 8%. And that is compared to the Department of Corrections. Probation is up to about 40%, which means that after someone goes through probation, and they're going to have there's going to be a 40% of that population that is going to be back in court. There's another statistic we follow, and that is failure rate. So let's say we have a class of 20 at any particular time. How many of those guys are going to be kicked out? I didn't really mention that, but there's a whole aspect of what we do that involves termination. And sometimes it's strikingly shocking almost how a young man will make a calculated decision that says something like, well, I can go through the first step program. It's going to take 2 years, but I'll go to the Department of Corrections for a 5-year sentence and I'll get out in 1.5 years. Because they know this. This is common understanding. And so they'll say, I like what you do, but I'm going to go ahead and go on to prison. And, it's a terrible decision, but ultimately they have to make it. And we counsel against it, but it does sometimes happen. And then we also have occasional guys that just can't follow our rules, cut off their ankle monitor, run off, etc. And then we have to terminate them. That number is about 20%, and that's pretty high. We'd like to see it lower, but it is, for the 80% that then succeed in the program, you've really got a strong base in their lives.
Okay, so Bill, we want to thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And I think he struck a chord. We had a lot of very involved eyes looking at Bill.
Yeah.
And so we'll talk about
Yeah.
what they are looking at going forward with regard to facilities. And,
Thank you.
And we just want to thank you.
Thank
for
you very
taking the
much.
time.
Really appreciate it.
Thank Beverly
Great.
for turning you loose on
Yes,
Sunday
right.
morning.
She's glad to do it. All right.